So before the midterms ended, we started with the discussion of the research methodology. We started with the research designs. However, I was not able to finish this one. In making the research design of your paper, let's use the classification based on question orientation. So you have to identify whether your study is qualitative or quantitative. I believe wala namang nag-mixed method design dito. So again, it's either quali or quanti. So if it is a qualitative research design, you also have to identify what kind of quali research design. Whether your study is ethnographic, if you are going to study the culture, behavior, or tradition of a certain group of people or a certain tribe, or you're going to make a phenomenological research wherein you will explore the experiences of your subjects or participants on a certain phenomenon. I think wala din namang nag-case study, but the case study involves studying in depth a certain case, or you are going to investigate a certain phenomenon in its real world context. So you will have participants here that you will study, example, may certain disease sila, and you will study in depth that certain disease, including everything, the signs and symptoms, the factors, why they got that disease, and the treatment they are doing or ina-administer sa kanila. And then narrative is actually just parang telling a story chronologically about something. So most likely this is done like sa mga autobiography of a certain people. Actually, the historical mga historical researches are under narrative type of qualitative research also, when they study about the history of something. So nagnanarrate sila based on the gathered data, mga artifacts and stories from the person with direct na involvement or experience over that historical phenomenon. So yun yung pagpipilian nyo if you have identified that your study is a qualitative research. But if you have identified that your study is a quantitative research because number one, you have your numerical data, and your data is empirical, meaning it will be gathered directly from experimentation or direct observation, or kayo mismo directly mag-gather ng information through interview or questionnaire. And then if you have identified that you can make inferences, you can make conclusions or even generalizations from the data that you have gathered, then again, that will be a quantitative research design. Now, if sure na kayo na quanti yung research ninyo, you have to identify also whether that is descriptive or experimental. So when you make your research design under the research methodology, you have to properly state in that portion of your paper that your study is quantitative descriptive research design or quantitative experimental research design. Now let's start with the types of descriptive research or descriptive researches. The descriptive researches can either be surveys, developmental studies, assessment or evaluation, but most of our descriptive studies nowadays are either comparative or correlational. And lastly, we also have the follow-up studies. Now, for the surveys, we have two types of surveys: descriptive survey and descriptive normative survey. When you say descriptive survey, you are going to make your own questionnaire, have it validated by experts, and administer it to your respondents. While when you say descriptive normative survey, you are going to use a standardized questionnaire. Just like the psychologists and our psychometricians, they have these test questionnaires that they administer to their clients for diagnosis. If that's the case, class, that you are going to use a standardized questionnaire, accepted questionnaire na siya, then that will be a descriptive normative survey. Now, let's look at some examples of a descriptive survey research. We have here stress and coping strategies of our nurses in ICU of hospitals. So the researcher here will be making his or her own questionnaire, asking for the stress levels of the participants and how they cope up with that stress. And then we also have Holland's vocational personality and working conditions for high level of job satisfaction, job performance, and stability of teachers. So questionnaire pa rin. They are going to conduct survey with the teachers of a certain school regarding their personality and working conditions for high level of job satisfaction and so on. And then quantitative measures for productivity of drug manufacturing firms. This is for pharmaceutical na side. Total quality management and empowerment of radiologic technologies for organizational effectiveness in the laboratory. This might be true for medical technologists also. When you are going to conduct a survey among the medical technologists working in the laboratory in terms of total quality management and their empowerment while they are working. So sa ilahang organizational effectiveness. And predictive efficacy of academic preparation of pharmacists on board examinations. So pwede din applicable din siya sa inyo as medical technologist if you are going to conduct a survey to medical technologists on how they prepare sa board exam. Mga registered, ano na ito ha, mga medtech na. So they, again, in your questionnaire, you will have questions on how they prepare sa board exam, and itatali nyo siya and i-compare nyo siya whether they are successful or not sa results sa boards. So survey through pen and paper na questionnaire, but since we cannot do it face-to-face, then virtually online questionnaire is accepted for this. So survey is having a questionnaire that is given to a lot of respondents. You can gather a lot of data with just one questionnaire only. Now, if your study is not a survey, then it can be a developmental study. So sa developmental study, we have two types, longitudinal and cross-sectional. When you say developmental studies, you are actually studying participant or group of participant, and you are tracing or sinusundan mo yung kanilang development sa isang bagay over time. So merong time element dito. Pwede siyang longitudinal class. For example, you will have the same participants over an extended period of time. Example, titingnan mo ang development ng first-year students sa kanilang skills, susundan mo sila hanggang mag-fourth year sila. So this is actually not applicable to undergraduate studies like what you are doing right now, because this one involves a lot of time. Imagine you are going to follow them, to follow their development from the first year until their fourth year. Kung anong skills na ba yung na-acquire nila. So again, it's not really applicable kasi hindi kayo matatapos nito. We are just given sa second sem for the data gathering procedure, and you cannot really conclude that there is really a skill na acquire with that limited time only. So other examples, we have a study on mathematical concepts that high school students develop from first year to fourth year. So when you say longitudinal study, one participant only, I mean one group of participants. Hindi magbabago. Susundan mo sila from first year to fourth year nila. What mathematical concepts have they learned? And then we also have a study on radiologic technologies in the hospital laboratory for the first 5 years of service. So you are going to conduct a study starting from the first year. They are working in a certain laboratory, and then you will follow them over time, whether 4 years, 5 years, and so on, as long the same participant yan sila, and titingnan mo ano na yung kanilang development as a professional. And then a study on autistic children from 1 to 5 years. You will be identifying autistic children, and then you are going to study their development from their first year until na mag 5 years old sila. So ano na yung development nila in terms of their skills, in terms of their knowledge, kung ano pa ba ang dapat mong studyhan. That is class A developmental study, specifically a longitudinal one. But when you say cross-sectional, ang difference lang nito is you will have different participants. You will just compare. So this can be done actually even in the undergrad, kasi you are not required to follow your participants for a long period of time. Pwede kang kukuha ka ng participants from the first year, example, medtech students. Kukuha ka ng participants na mga first year students, and then you will have another group of participants na mga fourth year students. And then you will study, for example, their skills as a medical technology students, and then you will compare what is the difference now of the level or the skills of this first year and the fourth year. Pwede siyang developmental studies pa rin kasi makikita mo yung difference ng skills nila. Though again, para mas klaro ha, longitudinal, you have the same group of participants that you are going to follow over an extended period of time, while cross-sectional is different na group of participants. You are just going to compare their development or their skills, kung ano man yung ini-investigate mo. So that's one type of a descriptive study. So I just cannot remember if we have this kind of study ngayon sa inyo. Kung meron bang descriptive developmental. Now, third, we have here descriptive assessment or evaluation. If you are going to assess the efficiency of something, then syempre we call it descriptive assessment or evaluation na study. So what are the examples of this kind of descriptive study? First, the use of scanners in determining the sex of babies. We have machines or equipment in the laboratory na ginagamit natin, right? Not just for determining the sex of the babies. Sa medical technology na world, marami kayong mga machines and equipments na ginagamit for diagnosis. So if you want to evaluate the efficiency of those machines, then dito yan siya mahuhulog, assessment or evaluation na study. Another thing, capabilities of freshman students entrance in College of Nursing or even in your field sa medtech. If you want to assess the capabilities of your first year students as they enter college, then dito yan siya mahuhulog na research design. And then performance of graduates in radiologic technology licensure examination and the factors that influence it. Assessment pa rin yan siya. If you want to assess, example, the board exam results of the medical technologies last time, kailan ba last nag-board exam yung mga medtech, i-assess mo yung performance nila and ano yung factors na nag-influence sa kanilang performance, mataas ba yung performance nila or mababa? And then again, including the factors that affect their performance, it's a descriptive evaluation or descriptive assessment na study. Okay? Questions so far? about the three types. So far, three types of descriptive research. Because I think marami ditong descriptive yung research. Quantitative, descriptive, and then we will identify what specific descriptive research are you going to conduct. Walang questions for the first three. Let us move on. Let's have the comparative. So we call it qualitative, descriptive, comparative research design. Pag comparative ang research design ninyo class, you are studying intervening variables and you are comparing two variables actually. And you will know this. Again, you will know that your study is a comparative study if in your statement of the problem, you have a question asking for the significant difference. Again, look at your statement of the problem. I believe I have checked all except for the group of Kamar sa statement of the problem ninyo. If you have a question asking, is there a significant difference between kung ano man yung dinedetermine yun na variables. Pag yan ang question ninyo sa statement of the problem, your study is quantitative, descriptive, comparative research design. Okay? So example, is there a significant difference between the performance of the first-year students and the fourth-year students? Comparative study yan siya. Okay? Now, how about the correlational? From the word itself, correlational, we are determining here the relationship or the association of our variables. And how do you know that your study is a correlational one? Also look at your statement of the problem. In your statement of the problem, if there is a question asking for the significant relationship, then again, your study is correlational. Example, is there a significant relationship between the demographic profile and the practices of the respondents? Correlational yan siya. Kasi you are asking about the relationship. Okay? I think I have examples here. Examples of correlational studies. We have the relationship between management styles and leadership dimensions of managers of a certain business firm. So meron ba daw relationship yung management style and leadership dimension? Dalawa yan. Yan yung kinukunan ng relationship. And then we also have role of personality factors and stress experienced by pharmacists working in the community. So ano ang kinukuhanan ng relationship? Personality factors and then stress. So merong mga variables class na ini-establish whether they have association or relationship when it comes to correlational studies. And lastly, we have the follow-up studies. Follow-up studies, example of this is the tracer studies. When you say tracer studies, you are going to look for them. Follow up. Magpa-follow up tayo sa kanila. Example, tracer studies of the graduates of medical technology, BS Medical Technology from 2015 to 2020. So you will be looking for them. Sino yung mga graduates natin from 2015 to 2020 and magpa-follow up tayo sa kanila. Ano ipa-follow up natin? Nakapasa na ba sila ng board exam? O nagtatrabaho na ba sila ngayon? Or saan sila employed? Public, private na mga institution, hospital ba, or private na mga laboratories? So yun yung ipa-follow up natin. We call it tracer studies. Is still under the descriptive research design. So I hope by now, class, yung mga descriptive ang study, na-identify nyo na what specific type of descriptive research are you going to do. Isusulat nyo yan siya sa first part of the research methodology. Again, we call it the research design. So I think last time I have shown you an example for this, but let me open it again. Hanapin ko lang muna, wait. But while I'm looking for it, do you have questions? I'm looking for the example na ako ang ipakita sa inyo, ha? Any question or clarification? Ayan ako dito. This one. Let us see this one. Hindi siya limited, Koy. You can compare a lot of things as long as ang question sa SOP is there a significant difference. Whether dalawa ang kinukuhanan mo ng difference or mas marami pa, comparative study pa rin yan siya. So this one is a study of the previous batch. I think, yeah, Ilanuela. Their title is Patient Satisfaction on the Clinical Laboratory Services among Tertiary Private Hospitals in General Santos City. If we look at their statement, this one is a completed study already. This is due for hardbound na. Look at their statement of the problem. They only have 3. What is the demographic profile? What is the level of satisfaction of the respondents in the clinical services in terms of patient care, facility, administrative features? And lastly, is there a significant relationship between the demographic profile and the level of satisfaction? So meron ba daw association ang gender doon sa patient satisfaction? Kung babae ba mas satisfy, kung lalaki, ganun yung ibig sabihin yan. And then meron din bang association yung age and even the educational attainment on their satisfaction level when it comes to the services of yung clinical laboratory services sa mga tertiary hospitals in General Santos City. So if we look at their conceptual framework, their independent variable will be the demographic profile. And then, syempre, what they are measuring, the outcome is the patient satisfaction. That's the dependent variable. And let's look at their research methodology. Medyo mahaba ang RRL. Okay, sa methodology. Ganito yung pagkasulat ng methodology. You have here an introductory statement introducing or you just have to identify ano yung nakalagay sa portion or section na ito ng paper ninyo. So the first part again is the research design. Look at the research design. This study utilized quantitative, descriptive research design, specifically correlational study. So this one is a correct research design. Plus in your in your proposal defense, kasali to siya sa pag-grade sa inyo. Kasali siya sa pag-grade, ha. Tinitingnan kasi doon sa criteria, tinitingnan if you have correctly identified your research design. So kung titingnan natin, yes, they have correctly identify their research design na this is quantitative, descriptive, and specifically a correlational study. Kasi diba they are looking for the relationship between the demographic profile and the satisfaction of their respondents sa clinical laboratory services. And then after identifying, you have to explain also bakit nyo nasabing quantitative, descriptive, correlational study. You may include descriptions of this kind of research designs, including class citations kung saan nyo kinuha yung mga descriptions na yan. Okay? So that's the first part of the research methodology. So far, do you have questions pa about this? Let me look if I have here, aside from correlational study, I cannot remember kasi I really have one. I think the medical fake news is still a correlational study. Let's look at this. I think this is still a correlational study. So medical fake news and fear mongering, this is still from the previous batch, due for hardbound also. If we look at their statement of the problem, demographic, level of influence, and yeah, is there a relationship between medical fake news and fear mongering? Okay, the recorded discussion, I'll just upload this and I will give you the link. Butang lang ako dito sa Schoology para mabalikan nyo kay murag taas-taas pa inyong balikan, Johar. Okay, well, let's look at their research design sa ilahang RRL. Mana mo sa inyong RRL? Mag-give ng pinakataas na part sa paper. Look at their paper. Dugay kay mahuman ng RRL. Okay, this one. Research design. Na ano lang niya, or supposedly this should be next page. Well, naka-doc man gud wala ni naka-PDF sa naguba ang format. But anyway, methodology. After the introductory paragraph, you have the research design. Anong sinulat nila dito? A research design is the plan, okay? Iba lang ang pag-start nila. A quantitative, okay? They have identified that their research is a quantitative research design, and specifically, researchers employ descriptive research design, specifically correlational. So though iba yung kanilang pagka-state compared with the other group, but they have correctly identified also that their study is quantitative, descriptive, correlational research design. Okay, so it's up to you how you're going to write the research design, as long as it is correctly identified and you have provided descriptions of everything, the quantitative, the correlational, and the descriptive doon sa part ng paper na yan. Hindi naman yan siya masyadong mahaba. Okay, so walang problema dyan. Anything else? Any other concerns before tayo mag-move on? The next part will be the experimental. Meron bang mag-experiment? I cannot remember kung meron ba experimental na research sa inyo. So this is the other type of a quantitative study, the experimental research, which is future-oriented. It is future-oriented because you have to do your experimentation pa, your investigation before you can give your conclusion. So this is also not hypothesis-free, meaning you have your hypothesis here and you're going to test your hypothesis. And what we are going to investigate here, whether the independent variable is effective on the dependent variable. So we are establishing cause and effect relationship. Merong experimental. Okay. Experimental. Again, what we are investigating here is whether the independent variable is effective sa dependent variable. So this one is very objective, systematic. We really have to follow the proper procedure, kung ano mang procedure ang i-adapt ninyo. And we are doing this in a controlled situation. For the purpose of just predicting and controlling phenomena and examining probability and causality among selected variables. Again, we are establishing cause and effect relationship if we are doing a quantitative experimental research. What are the disadvantages of doing this type of research design? The artificiality. Because remember, we cannot really do the experimentation directly to, example, human subjects because that will be unethical. So we use different models like animal models, or we do in vitro testing. We just use test tubes for testing or other laboratory equipment. And then number 2, the feasibility. Kasi there are experiments that are not feasible na magawa for the limited time that we have. And at the same time, we have to consider also the capability of the researcher, whether you are capable of doing the experiment by yourselves, or if your budget is enough to conduct a certain experimental studies, because we know that experimental studies are expensive. And then again, unethical. Though we don't really study the human subject directly, we have other models like animal models, but remember, animals also have rights. So we have a lot of ethical considerations. That is why we have the research ethics committee that is going to review your study para maiwasan natin or malimit natin yung mga problems with ethics. Okay? Now, the simplest experimental design includes two variables. You should always have your independent variable and your dependent variable. Do not forget, the independent variable is the one that is manipulated in the study. It is the predictor variable. Ito yung kino-control natin. While the dependent variable is the outcome variable. So this is being measured in the study. Yan yung mini-measure or dinedetermine natin in the study, the dependent variable. At the same time, the experimental design has two groups of participants. You always have your control, whether it is a positive control or a negative control or just a control. Pwede tanan klaseng control, positive and negative, as long as you have your control. And most especially the experimental group. So ito yung group na bibigyan mo ng iyong subject ng study. Example, if you have your plant material, then that's the experimental group. Now, characteristics of an experimental research design, syempre, this is usually numeric, and you have here sophisticated statistical design. We also have class-specific research designs for the experimental ones. So we will be discussing that later. And then this is usually limited to small samples. Unlike descriptive research design, na yung magkakandak ng survey, minsan umaabot ng 100 and above yung respondents. Pagdating sa experimental class, we only have limited samples. So for example, if you're going to use animals, for each group, minsan ang ginagawa namin is 4 to 5 animals per group. Meaning 4 animals for the control ones and 4 animals for the experimental group. That's how limited it is. And then labor intensive. Syempre, you are working in the laboratory, so this requires time and effort in doing the experiment. Now, when do we call the experimental research design a true experimental research design? We have here 3 things that you need to satisfy, again, before you can call it true experimental. The first one is manipulation, meaning you have your independent variables. You are going to manipulate them. You are going to control them also. And then sa control, ito yung talagang meron kang group for comparison, meaning you really have your control group here. Hindi pwede na okay ka na sa experimental group, wala ka nang i-compare, hindi mo na siya i-compare sa control mo or sa positive control mo. You cannot call that a true experimental research. And take note, the most important thing, randomization. In selecting your samples, in selecting your subjects, your example, your animal or your petri dish with the bacteria, you have to do it randomly. Sample, this animal will be for the control group and then the other one for the experimental group. In assigning them, dapat random. They should be given equal chance to be assigned in those groups. Hindi pwede nga kani dool sa ako, dito lang ni siya sa sa control group. Kani mga layo sa ako ang mga animals, dito na sila sa experimental group. No, that is not randomization. We don't call that randomization. Kasi ikaw na nagbuot-buot og pili din ha. Dapat tagaan nato silang equal chance. So how do we do that? It's either we use fishbowl method, wherein you have your coding for the animals, and then ilagay mo siya sa fishbowl and bunot-bunot. So that's the time na randomly selected na sila kasi they have equal chance na ma-select and ma-assign sa mga grupo na yon. So this one is just an example of an experimental research design. You have here a medical doctor has a new drug for the cure of typhoid fever. Now he will have two groups of patients. The one will be for the experimental design, and the other one, or the experimental group, and then the other one will be the control group. So the experimental group will be given the new drug na gustong i-introduce ng doctor, and then the control group will be those patients that will receive the ordinary drug or the drug that is being used in the market na nowadays for the typhoid fever. So it's an experimental design kasi number one, meron tayong manipulation with the new drug and the ordinary drug. Meron tayong control group. The control group will receive the ordinary drug. And then the randomization is when the patient is being randomly assigned to the groups. So matatawag natin siyang true experimental research design. Okay? Now for those class na experimental ang research design ng study nila, please listen because this is now the specific na mga research designs under the experimental study. So the first one is pre-experimental designs. Under the pre-experimental design, may mga specific pa dyan. So marami tayong i-consider. What are those specific pre-experimental designs? One-shot case study, the single group pre- and post-test design, the static group comparison, and the parallel equated two-group design. Let's discuss them one by one and identify kung anong saan mahuhulog ang research ninyo. Sa one-shot case study, ganito ang mangyayari, class. You have here X as the treatment, O as the post-test. Pag one-shot case study lang, meron ka lang isang grupo, meaning wala kang control. So you cannot call this a true experimental. Kaya nga siya tinawag na pre-experimental. Wala kang control. One group lang of participant. Anong gagawin mo sa one group of participant mo? You will give the treatment. After giving the treatment, diretso ka na post-test. Okay? Diretso post-test. Example, meron kang group of animals. Ibibigay mo na diretso yung treatment mo, yung plant material mo, and then magme-measure ka na kaagad. So one-shot case study, don't have control. And again, this is not a true experimental research design. Now, how about the single group pre- and post-test? Actually, it's almost the same. Ano lang yung kaibahan? Merong pre-test. Magte-test ka muna before mo ibibigay yung treatment and then magpo-post-test ka. Example, sa blood sugar. Mag-test ka muna ng blood sugar, tapos ibigay mo yung drug mo, and then after giving the drug, magpo-post-test ka. Ite-test mo na naman ulit yung blood sugar. Pero single group ito. We don't have control. So since we don't have control here, this is also not a true experimental research design. Okay? And then we have the static group comparison. You have two groups here. The first group has experience over something. Example, you are investigating the efficacy of a teaching strategy. Again, teaching strategy. So yung first na group of participant has experience over that teaching strategy, and then the other group has no experience or has no knowledge over that teaching strategy. Pero ite-test mo sila sabay. Again, ite-test mo sila sabay. Wala sila, hindi mo sila bibigyan. Example, ito nag-lecture ka, dito sa kabila hindi ka nag-lecture. Pero magbibigay ka ng test sa kanilang dalawa, pareho na test. So the purpose is just to establish the effect of the X. Meaning kung ano ang binigay mo na treatment or kung ano ang binigay mo na strategy sa kanila. Okay? That's static group comparison. Pero this is not again a true experimental research. Though you have two groups. You cannot call the other one a control kasi. Wala lang, hindi mo lang siya binigyan ng treatment. I-establish mo lang talaga kung may pagkakaiba ba dun sa group na binigyan mo ng treatment. And take note that randomization is not stated here. So, isa pa yun siya na hindi mo na talaga ito matatawag na true experimental research design. And then next will be the parallel equated two-group design. This is pre-experimental, so not a true experimental research design. What's their difference with the static group comparison? You will be doing the pre-test first, and then you will be giving the treatment in between the O1 and the O2, and then you will have the post-test after. So you will see here whether there is a change in their result after giving the treatment. The process method and the traditional method are the treatment. Yang O na yan, treatment yan siya, class. Okay? So, that's for the pre-experimental research design. They are still experimental, pero you cannot call them true experimental. If you want your study to become a true experimental design, you have to choose one from the following: the pre- and post-test control group, the Solomon 4 group design, and lastly, the post-test only control group design. Let's look at them one by one. Pag ang study nyo, class, ay pre- and post-test control group, meron kang dalawang grupo. Actually, 2 or more groups. 2 or more groups kasi you can have the negative control and the positive control. But in this case, ang binigay ko lang 2 groups lang. So you have the control group and the experimental group. So ano mangyayari? Take note of the R. R is random assignment. So binibigyan talaga, class, ng importance ang randomization when it comes to the true experimental. O1 is the experimental pre-test. So magpa-pre-test ka dito. Example, kung blood sugar ito, check mo muna yung blood sugar niya. And then ibibigay mo yung treatment mo. Okay, again, ibibigay mo yung treatment mo. For if this is a plant extract, sige, ibigay mo yung plant extract. After giving the plant extract, magpo-post test ka. So i-check mo na naman yung kanyang blood sugar. The other group is for the control. So you have here, magpa-pretest ka pa rin sa kanila, and then ibibigay mo yung control mo, kung ano mang ibibigay mo, kung positive control ba yan or negative control. Positive control, class, are these drugs and other chemical substances that is already accepted and may evidence na talagang magkakaroon sila ng effect. If you are testing for anticoagulant activity, ang positive control niyan, syempre, yung accepted na anticoagulant sa market na ginagamit na talaga silang anticoagulant. That's a positive control. But if it is a negative control, you will be looking for a chemical substance or just a substance that established din na hindi magbibigay ng target mo na effect. Kung anticoagulant yan, hanap kayo, class, ng substance na alam nyo and established na hindi talaga siya anticoagulant. Okay? So ibibigay mo siya, and then after giving or administering the treatment, the control treatment, magpo-post test ka ulit. Kaya tinawag siya pre- and post-test control group. This is a true experimental design. Okay? And then, you can ask question if you want to clarify something, if your study is an experimental study and you are confused kung unsa nga design inyong gamiton, please ask question. Next, the Solomon 4 group design. This one is a very sophisticated research design, actually highly sophisticated. So, kapag ganito ang research design ng study ninyo, medyo mahirap siya, pero this one is being accepted. Accepted yun na siya kay taas siya og level. So this is a high level na research design. So anong ginagawa for the Solomon group 4 group design? Syempre you have the 4 groups here. Again, you have the 4 groups here. You have the R. Lahat sila may randomization, meaning the assignment of the participants or the subjects in each group is done randomly. And then, ano mangyayari? You have the O1 here. O1 is the experimental group. Ang gagawin mo sa experimental group, magpa-pretest ka, tapos ibibigay mo yung experimental treatment mo. After giving the experimental treatment, anong gagawin? Mag-post test. And then you have another group na magpa-pretest ka. Example, mag-check ka ng dugo, ng blood sugar. Tapos, hindi mo siya bibigyan ng treatment. Okay? Again, hindi mo siya bibigyan ng treatment, pero magpo-post test ka. Now, the third group, hindi ka magpe-pretest, magbibigay ka directly ng iyong treatment, tapos magpo-post test ka na agad. And then lastly, the fourth group, hindi ka magpe-pretest, hindi ka din magbibigay ng treatment, pero magpo-post test ka. So sa last, mag-check ka pa rin ng sugar kung sugar ang hinahanap mo. This is a Solomon 4 group design. So yung XHA treatment yan. Yung mga O, test yan siya. Kung dito siya, pre-test. Kung dito sa last, post-test. Solomon 4 group design ang tawag niyan. Pero pwede din naman class post-test only control group. Meron kang dalawang grupo, experimental and control group. The subjects are also randomly assigned. Yung isa, bibigyan mo ng treatment, pero magpo-post test ka lang. Walang pre-test na nangyari ha. And then yung isa, since this is a control group, syempre hindi mo siya bibigyan ng iyong treatment, pero bibigyan mo siya ng whatever control chemical substance yung napili mo, and then magpo-post test ka diretso. So, anong example? Wait lang. I think I don't have a study here na post-test only, pero before tayo magkuha sa experimental, let's check some experimental research design that I have here. Pero wala ako sa medtech, hindi kasi nag-experimental yung medtech. Last time I think wala. Pero let's look at sa pharma. Ano ko siya makita? Kung anong ginawa nila sa research design nila. Ay. What is this study? Blood sugar lowering activity of formulated tea from Nephellium lapasum rambutan leaves in alloxan-induced diabetic Swiss albino mice. Let's look at their... This is due for... Actually, na hardbound na ni siya. So, cleared na ito sila sa akin. Let's look at their research design. This study utilized a quantitative experimental study, pre- and post-test control group study design for the bioassay. So, pre- and post-test. Bakit pre- and post-test? Kasi I think, ang ginawa nila dito, susulat ko na lang ang ginawa nila dito. Since this one is pre- and post-test, ang ginawa nila, they have the experimental group, the positive control group, and the negative control group. And then, nag-pre-test kasi sila. So, nag-check sila ng blood sugar. Lahat ito, nag-check sila ng blood sugar. Tapos, nagbigay sila ng treatment. Siyempre, itong experimental group, binigay nila si rambutan. Tapos, itong positive control group, I think, ang binigay nila dito is... I cannot remember, but let's just have the most common anti-diabetic drug, the metformin. Tapos ang negative control, ang binigay nila dito, water lang. Kasi water cannot really, wala siyang positive or negative effect on the blood sugar. Okay, Sarah. And then, nag-post-test sila. So, anong ginawa nila sa post-test? Nag-check sila ulit ng blood sugar. So, pre-test and post-test. So, this one class, since meron randomization dito, ang pag-assign nila ng kanilang animals is random sa bawat grupo. Then, this is a true experimental. Nakalimutan nilang ilagay yung word na true dyan. But this is a true experimental, quantitative, true experimental, specifically the pre-test and post-test control group study design. Yan yung pagka-state sa research design nitong experimental na study. Questions so far? Yung mga experimental ang study, do you have questions or clarification? Anything that you want to clarify or okay na kayo na identify nyo na yung inyong research design? If walang randomization, may post-test, pre-test pa rin kayo pero walang randomization, ang tawag natin dyan, quasi-experimental. Again, pag walang randomization, quasi-experimental. Example, time series lang. Magkakaroon ka ng time after 1 hour, check mo yung kanyang example. After 1 hour, check mo ang kanyang blood kung nag-coagulate na ba. Kung wala pa, patuloy ka pa. After 2 hours, check ka na naman kung nag-coagulate na ba. Kung wala pa, padayon lang kung mag-coagulate siya. That's time series experiment. Kung walang randomization, and kung wala kang control na ginamit, nag-time series ka lang, quasi-experimental research design yan. Yung sa amin na staining research, ano na research design po doon? Ano sa ganun na inyong study, Marian? Nakalimot ko. Sige, himuon ninyo. I have not seen your methodology actually, no? So, delete ko. So, Ternate. Ternate to, no? So, himuon ninyo sa Ternate.
Ma'am, marinig po ako, ma'am.
Sige, go, Marian.
Ang gawin po, ma'am, is i-extract po namin ang butterfly pea po, ma'am. Tapos, i-compare namin siya, ma'am, sa Gemsha staining method po.
Okay. Spelling sa Gemsha, anak. Gemsha? Anyway, kanino, i-compare nato ni sila. Ano yung result nyo dito? May numerical result kayo? Wala.
Ano, ma'am? Yan po yung sa blood cells, ma'am. Actually, ma'am, nag-hingi rin po kami ng ano pa kay Sir Georgie, kasi yun man yung sabi sa amin ni Ma'am Dalig, ma'am, na maghingi po ng opinion po sa kanya regarding sa SOP namin, ma'am. Kasi, like I said, ma'am, yung dati po na pina-check namin, ma'am, yung color, yung variable, ma'am. Ang ano lang namin doon, ma'am, is yung 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, ma'am. Tapos yung 0 is yung walang color na nag-stain. 1 is yung ganun, good, ma'am. Tapos, nag-hingi po ako ng ano pa kay Sir George, ma'am, if meron pa po siyang masuggest sa amin, ma'am, ba na yung mas statistical method po, ma'am.
Okay. Sige, pero I think I got your study. This will be a true experimental. Mag-true experimental kayo kasi you have your control here, you have your manipulation, and ang gagawin nyo na lang is random assignment of the cells na lang para maging true experimental talaga siya, pero this is just a post-test only control group. Bakit post-test only? Wala kayong i-check, di ba, before nyo ilagay si Ternate and si Gemsha? Walang i-check. So walang pre-test. Pero after administering this to, mag-check na kayo ngayon kung may color. So mahuhulog yan siya na post-test only control group. So yan yung magiging research design ninyo. Ito siya. Ito yung magiging research design. You have your first group, you have the treatment, the butterfly, ano to? butterfly P. Tapos i-check ninyo kung nag-color ba. So that will be the post-test. And then the other group, which is also randomly assigned for the blood ha. And then, ang ilalagay niyo dito is yung Gemshan yun na method. And then magpo-post-test kayo kung anong color din ba. And then i-compare na lang. So, true experimental pa rin. Pero post-test only, control group. Okay? Nakuha? Or you want to ask pa something?
Ma'am, yung itest po kasi namin, ma'am, is blood cell. So, bali po, ma'am, magkuha kami ng dugo, tapos randomly lang po namin siya. Tapos kung anong slide po yung may blood, randomly lang po namin na i-stain po yun siya using the ma'am, yung mga treatment namin also the Gemshan method, ma'am.
Oo. Kasi mo magkuha blood?
Wala, hindi ka man ma'am. Nahulat man dyan ma'am.
You cannot get blood from you, ha? I mean, sa mga members ng group, dili na siya pwede sa research kasi that will be a form of bias. So you really have to get blood from other people. It's up to you na kung kinsa ninyo na siya kwaon. Kunya, unsa makadaghan ang blood nga inyong ibutang sa ano-ana? Drop lang, no? Drop lang?
Drop lang po, ma'am.
Okay. So, example, makuha mong 5 ml nga blood sa isa ka person, and then ang pag-random assignment ani, magbutang mo og blood sa mga slides, and then random ang inyong pag-assign na kaninga slide is for the Gemsha, and then the other slide is for the butterfly P. So there is, para masulod ninyo ang random assignment and masulod siya as true experimental. Ato inyong buhaton.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Okay. Anything else? Andre? Okay. Sige, you can send that. Sa man inyo, sa tanaw ni mo, Andre, ang inyong research design. Go, Sarah. Open man to. Go lang. Na si Andre din, he. Sige, you can send sa chat your your research design if you are unable to turn on your mic. Or kung kaya nyo mag-turn on sa inyong mic, you can raise your concern here. Yes, Andre. De, istorya ka? Naka-unmute mo ka. So sige, let us continue. Isan na lang na siya, Andre. Okay. Sige, we have the mixed method researches. Diba sabi ko sa inyo, pwede natin i-mix ang quali and ang quanti. Now, sa mixed method researches, we also have 3 specific types: the convergent, parallel, explanatory, sequential, and exploratory sequential. So let's discuss them one by one. Pag sinabing convergent parallel class, since parallel ito, you are going to collect the quali and the quanti data at the same time or in a single phase. Meaning you are treating both data equally. Equal. Ang imuhang makuha sa quali, katong imuhang i-interview, imuhang linguistic na data is very important, as well as your data na numerical. So, equally important sila. And then yung pag-analyze ng mga data na yan is independent, meaning you will analyze the numerical data independently and you will also analyze the qualitative data independently. Magmi-mix na sila doon sa overall interpretation. So there is you are going to look for convergence, divergence, kung nag-a-agree ba yung quali and quanti na data mo or meron bang mga contradictions or relationship. So for the schematic diagram of doing a convergent parallel mixed method research design, you have here qualitative data, magko-collect ka. So you will be, example, mag-interview ka and then magko-collect ka din ng quantitative na data. Kagaya ng ginawa ng isang researcher his study is about knowledge, attitude, and practices of the pharmacist kasi pharmacy yun na study sa ano nga yun? Basta it's something about the pandemic na COVID-19. So nag-interview siya ng mga pharmacists sa community and then meron din siyang questionnaire na para pa rin doon sa knowledge, attitude, and practices. And then i-analyze niya yon independently kung ano yung naging result ng kanyang interview and ano yung naging result ng kanyang pag-conduct ng survey. And then after that, ipaghahalo niya yan. So we have the point of interface. Iko-compare or i-relate niya kung meron ba talagang relationship ang dalawang data na nakuha niya. And then magkakaroon siya ng isang interpretation for both of the data. That is called convergent parallel design. The second one is called explanatory sequential. So the purpose from the name itself, explanatory sequential, you are going to use the qualitative data to explain, again, to explain the quantitative data. So again, the qualitative, yung result mo sa interview, gagawin mo yung gagawin mo yung pang-explain sa result ng quantitative data. So this is actually a two-phase design. Hindi kagaya ng convergent parallel na you're going to collect both data at the same time. Ito two-phase. Mauuna muna si quantitative before ka mag-collect ng qualitative. So nakadepende yung quali mo sa iyong quanti. Now, among the two, ang binibigyan ng priority is actually the quantitative data. So ganito siya. You will have the quantitative data collection and analysis. Tapos, you will have magpa-follow up ka through the collection of the qualitative data. And then, before ka magbibigay ng interpretation. So, bigyan ko kayo ng example para ma-picture out ninyo. Meron ditong nag-conduct ng survey of the caregiver's attitude towards the elderly population. Ano ba yung attitude ng mga caregiver doon sa mga adult nila na mga patients? And then ito yung result. Nakita na ang kinuha na result is quantitative kasi it's a survey. So naka-questionnaire ito, merong numerical data. Now sa quantitative na result, nakita ng researcher na merong high degree of caregiver stereotyping sa elderly population, especially sa issues of race and gender. Merong mataas ang result dito sa part na ito, race and gender. So ang ginawa ng researcher, nag-interview siya, nag-select siya ng mga caregiver na in-interview niya, bakit kaya mataas yung attitude, stereotyping attitude nila sa issues of race and gender. So, ang nangyari, meron siyang quantitative result, numerical result doon sa kanyang pag-conduct ng survey. Tapos, ang result ng kanyang survey, in-explain niya based doon sa result ng pag-interview niya. So, na-understand niya ngayon through the interview bakit merong ganitong attitude ang kanyang mga participants. Kaya siya tinawag na explanatory sequential. Sequential kasi mauuna si quanti tapos si quali. Explanatory kasi gagamitin ang qualitative result to explain the quantitative result. And then the last one is called exploratory sequential. Baliktad ito siya, class. Mauuna si quali before si quanti. Again, mauuna si quali before si quanti. So for exploratory sequential, ang binibigyan ng priority is si qualitative data. So bakit natin ito ginagawa? Una, because wala tayong instrument na available. When you say instrument available, wala tayong makita na questionnaire, hindi natin alam yung variable, hindi natin alam ang theory, wala tayong guide for the collection of the data. So mag-i-interview muna tayo kung ano yung sasabihin nila ng mga participants natin. Yun yung kukunan natin ng guide para makagawa tayo ng questionnaire. So again, quali muna. And then the result of the quali will be used to make the quantitative na instrument. And then before tayo gagawa ng interpretation. So baliktad siya. So we have here the example, comparing the practices of rural and urban communities towards COVID-19. Practices ha, practices ng rural and urban communities sa COVID-19. Kaya lang, kapag ganito kasi ang aim ng study natin, example, hindi natin alam ano bang ginagawa doon sa mga rural areas. Nagmamask ba sila or hindi? Or doon sa mga urban na areas, ano bang ginagawa nila? Mga practices nila for COVID-19. So kasi hindi natin alam, ang question number 1, itong what are the practices, ma-answer ito through interviewing people living in the rural and also in the urban areas. And then pag nakita na natin, oh, ito pala yung mga practices nila. Gagawa na tayo ng questionnaire. Magsa-survey na tayo both on the rural and the urban communities. Meron na tayong numerical data after. And makakapag-ask na tayo ng question kung meron bang significant difference ang level of practice ng rural and urban settlers sa pagkontrol ng transmission ng COVID-19. Kasi kung interview lang, hindi natin talaga mako-compare kung may difference. Kaya ang result ng interview, gagamitin natin to make a questionnaire para meron tayong numerical data and makukuha natin kung may difference ba talaga or wala. Again, this is called mixed method research design, specifically exploratory sequential. Kabaliktaran ng explanatory sequential. Questions about the mixed method research design? Or do you want to clarify something? Wala namang magmi-mixed method, no? Matagal tayo masyadong matapos pag mag-mixed method tayo, especially if sequential siya, na mag-i-interview ka muna before ka gagawa ng questionnaire mo. And then mag-a-administer ka pa ng questionnaire, magko-collect ka na naman ng data. So two-phase, or kung the other way around, magko-questionnaire ka muna, and then the result of the questionnaire will be used to make questions para itatanong mo doon sa interview mo sa pag-collect mo ng qualitative na data. Matagal matapos. So, kaya sa undergrad, seldom ka lang makakakita ng mag-mixed method design. Okay? So, focus lang muna either quali or quanti. Wala nang question? So, let us move on.
Ma'am,
Yes.
sa ano, good ma'am? Sa research design, good ma'am? Sa quantitative, pwede dalawa ang gamitin, ma'am?
Ba't yung dalawa?
Ay, pwede siya cross-sectional or tong quantitative, ano good ma'am? Descriptive, correlational?
Depende sa statement of the problem ninyo. Okay, kung naamoy question nga significant relationship, automatic na siya nga correlational.
Okay pa, ma'am. Nalito mag ako, ma'am, sa ano, ma'am, sa cross-sectional kay, di ba, ano sa cross-sectional kitong by age, good ma'am?
Okay. Ano na siya? Mask disposal man ninyo, di ba, Rebel?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Diretso na to siya correlational inyong ha. Though magkuha mo og kanang sa by age ninyo na kanang ilahang level of practice sa mask disposal, pero ang ending magod sa inyong study naa ba siya relationship? Ang age ba na ay relationship dito sa pag-dispose nila sa mask? Knowledge ba to or practice? I cannot remember. But anyway, since mo na ang last ninyo nga question, correlational lang yun na inyong study.
Okay pa, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. Sige, anything else? Wala na. So, after the research design class, ang next part of your research methodology is called the research local. From the name itself, local, this is the area, this is the venue or the site where you are going to conduct your study. Again, asa mo mag-conduct sa inyong study, that will be your research local. If it is in General Santos City, then you write General Santos City. If it's a certain barangay only in General Santos City, So you write specifically what barangay are you going to, where you are going to conduct your study. If it is an institution because you are going to conduct an experiment, so kung asa ninyo i-conduct ang inyong experiment, mauna inyong research local. But take note that you are not just simply stating na the researchers are going to conduct the experiment in General Santos Doctors Medical School Foundation Incorporated, period. Hindi lang siya ganon. You have to describe the area, including a brief history of that institution. Even the mission and the vision of that institution will be included in the research local. So example, we have here, this is not the research local, baliktad niya ako ang, check na ko. This is not the research local of the study. This is the population and sample. So let me give you an example of a research local again. This one is for the experimental na study para na may picture and paano niya siya himuon. This is the research design. After the research design will be the research local. So look at the research local. This study was conducted. Was na kay human naman niya, pero ang inyuha naka-future tense na tanan sa verb. Kasi wala pa man mo na human og conduct. So this study will be conducted at the pharmacy Laboratory 2 of GSDMSFI. Depende sa inyo kung asa mo mag-conduct. Sa MedTech Lab, you have to be specific. So, take note, wala lang na siya nag-end nga sa doctors sila mag-conduct of study. They have also included description kung unsa man ng GSDMSFI. So, example like this one, the school also offers BS Medical Technology and so on. And then yung lahat daw ng department merong laboratory skills and laboratory skills na fully air-conditioned, and the school is located at this one, Barangay Dajangas West, Bulaong Subdivision, General Santos City. However, duha ilahang research local. Ang ilahang main research local is sa doctors, kaya dito sila mag-conduct of study, pero naa sila another one kung asa nila gikuha ilahang plant material. So, this one, the leaves of Nephelium lepacium rambutan were collected from Kiamba, Sarangani Province. So kung asa mo mag-collect sa inyong example plant material, i-include ninyo na siya sa inyong research local. Naalang niya siya sila'y hanging page which is supposedly not. Dapat dili na siya. Dapat kani siyang Swiss albino mice. Diri pa ni siya. Naguba lang ni ilahang format. But since naa sila class, aside from their plant material, naa pa sila animals, kung asa nila gikuha po ng ilahang animals, included na siya sa research local. So just like this one, the Swiss albino mice that were used in the study were collected from Barangay Aplaya, Santa Rosa, Laguna. So tanang place class nga gikuha ninyo sa inyong mga needs sa inyong research, included siya sa research local, but the main one is kung asa mo mag-conduct kung experimental siya. By the way, naghimo din ni sila og schematic diagram of their research methodology. You have to place this after the research design. Pero wala tay hanging page. Dapat ang hanging page is just like this one. O, kana ganing walay sulod na page. Dapat manggo diretso-diretso na siya. Kung nag-end sila sa medical dinhi, kaning research methodology nila dapat musunod na siya. And kaning technology na ni dapat nakadugtong niya siya diri sa Swiss albino mice para walay hanging page. Now let's have examples of study na kato experimental man to, so mag-conduct sila og research no sa school. How about study na descriptive? Paano nato himuon ang research local? Let's have examples para mahimugay ninyo. So this one. After the research design had the research local. This one is the medical fake news and fear mongering, the Research local is General Santos City. So look at this one. This study is conducted in General Santos City, Philippines. So a highly urbanized first-class city in Sorsogon, Philippines. And then, dili lang din ha mag-end ha, you have to provide a description of unsa man ang General Santos City. So appeal na din ha ang statistics ana and unsa pa mga sige butang nila diri. Regional Center for Trade and Industry, description na siya sa Gensan, and then gi-include nila ang domiciles or ang mga barangays kung paano gihati ang Gensan. So that is how you make the research local. Okay, questions so far? By the way, aside from the research local nga part, kung tanawa na to, ambot lang kung i-add ba nila, basta let's look at their appendices. I think they provided the map here. Pero sa appendices na siya ibutang ha, dili siya dito under sa research local. Pangitaw na to kung nagbutang yun ba sila. Yeah, nagbutang sila, naguba lang format. This one, map of General Santos City. You have to provide a map of your research local, but you have to place that in the appendices. So just like this one. This is the map, kabutang map of General Santos City. If you're going to conduct your studies sa doctors, you have to provide a map sa Gensan nga nakapoint mismo kung asa dapit si GSD, MSFI. That's the second part of the research methodology class. So I think dira ako mag-end sa